I took the lookout job because my lease ended in May, and my job ended in April, and a girl I knew from college posted about it in a group chat like it was a joke. Forest Service, seasonal, live alone on top of a mountain in Montana and watch for smoke. $14 an hour, and they throw in the tower. I applied at 2 in the morning and got a call back 9 days later from a man named Ron who asked me exactly 3 questions. Could I be alone for long stretches? Could I climb stairs? And did I scare easy? I said yes, yes, and no. One of those turned out to be a lie, but I didn't know which one yet. The tower is called Purcell Point, and I'm not going to tell you where it is beyond that it's in northwest Montana, in a district with more grizzlies than people. It's a 14 by 14 glass box on steel legs, 55 steps up, sitting on a bald knob at about 7,000 feet. From the catwalk you can see 3 drainages, a dozen ridgelines, a sliver of a reservoir way off to the southwest, and on a clear day, Canada. Inside there's a bed, a propane fridge, a 2-burner stove, a table, and in the dead center of the room, the Osborne Firefinder, which is basically a giant compass with a map of the whole district under glass. You spot smoke, you sight it through the Osborne, you get an azimuth, you call it in. That's the job. That's the whole job. Ron drove me up the first week of June with my food and my gear in the back of a green work truck, and on the way he gave me the standard talk. Radio check-in every morning at 9. Weather observations at noon. Keep the propane lines clean. Hang your food even though you're 50 feet up, because bears are patient and stupid in equal amounts. He'd been in the district 31 years, and he talked about lightning the way other people talk about an X. He told me the tower had been struck 4 times that he knew of, and that when a storm sits on you, you stand on the little wooden stool with the glass insulators on the feet, and you don't touch anything metal, and you wait. Then, right when we were unloading the last box, he said, "You'll see animals, log the smoke. That's what the log's for." I said, "Sure," and I thought that was a weird way to phrase it, and then a marmot screamed somewhere below us and I forgot about it. The first 2 weeks were the best 2 weeks of my life, and I say that having gotten married since. You wake up above the clouds, actual clouds, below you, filling the drainages like milk poured into a bowl, and the ridgelines poke through like islands. The sun comes up and burns it off by 10. I read 11 books in 14 days. I learned every ridge by name, and then gave the unnamed ones my own names. The one due east with the burn scar shaped like a boot, I called Boot Ridge. The long, low one across the north drainage, Dog's Back. I did my radio checks. I did my weather. I spotted my first smoke on day 9, an abandoned campfire near a trailhead. Some outfitters got to it in an hour. And Ron told me over the radio, "Good eye," and I was stupidly proud of myself for the rest of the day. The official log lives in a green metal binder next to the Osborne. Date, time, azimuth, what you saw, what you did about it. It goes back years. The handwriting changes every June like clockwork, and flipping through it is like reading a diary written by 9 different people who were all only allowed to talk about weather. I found the second notebook on day 16. I was cleaning. There's not much to clean in a 14-foot box, so when I clean, I really clean. And I had the cabinet under the bench emptied out. Spare mantles for the lantern, a coffee can full of mismatched screws, a mouse-chewed paperback of a Louis L'Amour novel, and way in the back, standing up flat against the wall so you'd miss it unless you took everything out, a black composition notebook with a rubber band around it. The rubber band had gone brittle and it snapped when I touched it. The first page said in block letters, "Movement log, not for the binder." The handwriting matched the official log entries from 3 seasons back. I checked. A lookout who signed everything DK and drew a little pine tree next to the date, June through October, and then stopped appearing. The next season's official log opened with someone else's handwriting. DK's notebook wasn't crazy. You'd expect pages of scrawl and drawings of eyes. It wasn't like that at all. It was tidy. It was formatted like the official log, actually. Date, time, azimuth, observation. Just, the observations were different. June 22nd, 11:40. Azimuth 84, Boot Ridge, upper third. One walker, moving north along the crest. Dark. Big. In the open, maybe 90 seconds. 10 times binos. Not a bear. June 22nd. Note. Third one this month. Always between 1,000 and 1,400. Always on a ridgeline. Always alone. July 3rd. 0210. No azimuth, sound only. North drainage. Something running the valley floor, running hard. Long stretches between breaks in the brush. Runners again. Moon 94%. Pages of that. Weeks of it. Walkers in the day, up high. Runners at night, down low. He tracked the moon percentage on the night entries the way the official log tracks humidity. And near the back, on a page by itself, a numbered list. 1. Smoke goes in the binder. Movement goes here. Nowhere else. Not on the radio. 2. Walkers keep to the ridges and keep to daylight. Don't glass one longer than a 10 count. They can tell. 3. Runners keep to the drainages and keep to dark. Nights, the moon is better than half. Close the shutters after sunset and don't use the lantern. 4. They don't share. You will never see both in the same 24 hours, if that ever changes. That's where it ended. Not torn out. He just stopped writing mid-sentence, and the rest of the page is blank, and the next page is blank, and the notebook is blank all the way to the back cover. I sat with that notebook for a long time. Outside, it was a flawless June afternoon, visibility forever, and I remember a Clark's nutcracker landed on the catwalk railing and yelled at me through the glass while I read Rule 4 over and over. Here's the thing about being alone at 7,000 feet. Your brain has all this idle capacity it normally spends on other people, and with nobody around, it spends it on whatever's in front of it. I knew that. I'd read about lookout psychology before I took the job, the studies about isolation, the guys in the 50s who started radioing in smokes that weren't there. So I put the notebook back in the cabinet, behind the coffee can, and I told myself DK had been up here too long, and I made dinner, and I did not think about it at all, except for constantly. 11 days later, I saw my first walker. It was July 1st, a little before noon, and I was doing my weather obs, which means I was already standing at the east windows with the binoculars around my neck. Movement on Boot Ridge, upper third, right where DK said. My first thought was elk. My second thought was that elk don't walk like that. It was on 2 legs. It was a mile and a half away through 10-power glass in midday heat shimmer, so all I really got was proportions. There's a white bark pine snag up on that crest that I'd looked at every day for a month, dead and silver and about 12 feet of it still standing, and the thing walked past that snag, and its head was even with the top third of it. It was dark brown or black, and it moved with this long, unhurried stride, arms swinging low, and it never once looked around. Deer look around. Bears look around. Everything up here spends half its life checking over its shoulder. This thing walked the crest of an exposed ridge in full sun like it had never in its life needed to check anything. I watched it for what felt like a minute. Then I remembered Rule 2. Don't glass one longer than a 10 count. They can tell. And I felt ridiculous. And I kept watching anyway. And right then, a mile and a half away, it stopped. It didn't turn around. It just stopped, mid-stride, the way you stop when you hear your name in a crowd. I put the binoculars down so fast I hit myself in the sternum. When I got the nerve to raise them again, maybe 30 seconds later, the ridge was empty. A mile and a half of open crest, 30 seconds, empty. I did not log it in the binder. I sat there for a while with my heart going, and then I got the black notebook out of the cabinet, and under DK's last entry, in my own handwriting, I wrote the date, the time, the azimuth, and 1 walker, Boot Ridge, upper third, stopped when glassed. I put the glasses down. Writing it felt like admitting something. It also felt weirdly polite, like the notebook was a form that had been waiting 3 years for somebody to fill it out. The runners took longer, because the runners you don't really see. You hear them. The nights up there are loud in a way that surprised me. Wind in the trees below sounds exactly like a river, all night. And there are actual rivers under that, and elk crashing around, and once a mountain lion screamed somewhere on Dog's Back, and I learned that a mountain lion scream is a sound your body reacts to before your brain does. My legs were shaking before I'd even consciously registered hearing anything. Old wiring. The runners were different from all of it. Mid-July, Moon about 3/4. I woke up at 2 in the morning for no reason, which by itself wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the silence. The wind had died and the whole north drainage had gone quiet. No bugs, no birds, nothing. And into that quiet came a sound of something moving along the valley floor at a dead sprint. You could track it by the brush. Crash, and then a long nothing, and then crash again, way farther along than anything should have gotten in that gap. Whatever it was covering ground in bounds, and it was doing it in the dark, downhill through deadfall and boulder fields, at a speed I would not want to attempt on a groomed trail at noon. Then a second one answered it from the far side of the drainage. I say answered because that's what it was. The first one let out a call, and I've spent a lot of hours since trying to figure out how to describe that call. And the closest I can get is, take a wolf howl, which is a beautiful sound, a genuinely beautiful sound, and then imagine someone doing an impression of it. Someone with the wrong throat for it. All the notes are there. The shape of it is there. But it sits wrong, the way a face in a dream sits wrong. And underneath the howl part there's a second sound running along with it that howls don't have. A kind of wet, effortful undertone, like the sound is costing it something. The second one answered with the same call, and then both of them went quiet, and about 10 minutes later I heard them again, together now, running the drainage north, and then they were out of range and the bugs started back up like someone flipped a switch. I hadn't moved the entire time. I was sitting up in bed with the blanket in both fists like a child. The shutters were open, because it had been a hot day and I'd wanted the cross breeze, and the moon was pouring in across the floor. And I looked at that square of moonlight on the floorboards and thought about Rule 3. And I got up and closed the shutters on the north side, and then, feeling stupid, on all the other sides too. In the morning I wrote it up in the black notebook. Time, drainage, moon 76%, 2 runners. And then, because it was my notebook now too and I could add what I wanted, the howl is wrong. By August I had the pattern cold, and the pattern was exactly what DK said it was. Walkers. Daylight only, and I mean strict daylight. I never saw one within an hour of either end of it. Ridge lines only. Always alone, or once, in early August, 2 of them about 400 yards apart on dog's back, moving the same direction like a man in his shadow. Unhurried, always. Silent, always. I got so I could almost predict them. Hot, still, blue sky days, between 10 and 2. I saw walkers 9 times in July and August. I never heard a walker make a single sound. Runners, night only, and only when the moon was better than half. That part held so cleanly it stopped feeling like a coincidence and started feeling like a rule of physics. New moon week, the drainages were just drainages. Regular animal noise, elk, coyotes, the works. Then the moon would fatten past half, and somewhere in there, always in the dark stretch between midnight and 4, the drainages would go silent and the running would start. Valley floors only. I never once heard a runner up high. They stayed off the ridges like the ridges were electrified. And Rule 4 held. All summer, it held. On a walker day, the nights were quiet no matter what the moon was doing. After a runner night, I wouldn't see a walker for a day or two, even in perfect conditions. They took turns. The whole district, thousands and thousands of acres of it, and these 2 kinds of things were running a schedule on it, sharing it the way divorced parents share a kid, never once standing in the same room at the same time. Somewhere in there, I stopped pretending I didn't believe it. There wasn't a single moment. It was more like how you stop pretending you're not in love with somebody. One day you just notice you've been planning your whole life around it. I was planning my days around the walkers and my nights around the moon, and I'd been doing it for weeks. I told one person. Sort of. There's another tower in the district, Cabin Ridge, about 18 miles south of me as the raven flies, and the lookout there was a guy named Walt who'd been doing it 22 summers. We'd talk on the radio, on a channel the dispatchers don't really monitor, mostly about weather and books and the pack rat that was at war with him. Good radio voice, slow and dry. Late one evening in early August, after a walker day, I worked up to it sideways. I said, "Walt, you ever see anything weird from up there, wildlife-wise?" The radio silence has a texture when someone's holding the mic and not talking. You can hear it. He held it a long time. Then he said, "You find the notebook?" I didn't answer that, which was an answer. "Then you know where it goes," he said. "It don't go on this radio." And then, a little softer, the only soft thing I ever heard out of him, "You're doing fine, kid. Everybody who lasts finds the notebook. The ones who don't last are the ones who try to put it in the binder." And he changed the subject to a hailstorm coming up from Idaho. And that was the entire conversation, the whole summer, on the subject. Everybody who lasts finds the notebook. I thought about DK writing Rule 4 and stopping mid-sentence. I thought about the fact that his handwriting never came back the next June. Mid-August, I went to town. You get resupply days, somebody comes up to cover the tower, and you drive 2 hours to a town with one grocery store and a bar and a hardware store, and you stand in the produce section feeling like an astronaut. I bought my food, I called my mom, I ate a cheeseburger that I still think about, and at the hardware store, along with lantern mantles and batteries, I bought a padlock. The trapdoor at the top of the tower stairs has a hasp on the underside. It's been there forever, older than the current paint, but there'd never been a lock on it because who are you locking out at 55 steps above nothing? The clerk rang it up without comment. $4 and change. I put it in the drawer under the Osborne when I got back, and I didn't hang it on the hasp because hanging it on the hasp felt like agreeing to something, and I wasn't ready to agree yet. The hiker was the same week. There's a trailhead register at the bottom of the north drainage, and part of the gig is you keep half an eye on the trail traffic because hikers cause fires and hikers get lost. Wednesday afternoon I watched a single guy come up the north trail, big pack, moving well, and through the glasses I got a decent look at him at the second switchback where the trail faces the tower. Red pack, tan hat, trekking poles. He waved at the tower. People do that. I stepped out on the catwalk and waved back. He camped that night at the lake below Dog's Back, about 2.5 miles out. I could see his tent, a little orange wedge, and after dark his headlamp moving around. And then the headlamp went out around 10. The moon that night was at about 92%. I'd closed my shutters at sunset, per Rule 3, but the shutters on that tower are exterior wooden panels with gaps at the hinges, and if you put your eye to the gap, you can see out fine. I wasn't planning to. I was in bed by 11. But at 1:40 in the morning, the drainage went silent, that specific total silence, and I was up and at the gap in the north shutter before I'd fully decided to be. Full dark forest, moonlit lake, the little pale smudge of the tent. And the running started, way up the drainage, and it came down the valley the way it always did. In bounds, crash and silence and crash. And I watched the tree line by the lake, and my hands were sweating onto the windowsill. And I remember thinking, clear as a bell, it's going to be the tent. It wasn't the tent. The running came down the valley, closer than I'd ever heard it. Close enough that I could hear the breathing between the crashes. Huge, ragged breathing like a horse at the end of a race. And it passed the lake, past the tent, and it stopped somewhere just inside the tree line north of the water. And the drainage sat there in dead silence for, I'm going to say, 4 minutes, with that orange tent sitting in the open like a dropped wallet. Then something walked out of the trees onto the lakeshore, and it walked on 2 legs, and it was a man. It was 200 yards of moonlight, and I had good glasses, and my eyes were fully adjusted, and what came out of the tree line was shaped like a tall man, and it walked like a man walks when he's just run a long way, loose and blown, hands, actual hands, hanging at his sides. It went to the edge of the water. It crouched and drank, face down to the lake, which a man wouldn't do. And when it lifted its head and the moonlight caught it straight on, the head was wrong. The jaw was too far forward and too deep, like a face that was mid-yawn and had gotten stuck, and the whole skull sat wrong on the neck, tipped forward, carried, the way you'd carry something heavy. It stood there dripping, and it looked at the tent for a while, long enough that I stopped breathing. Then it turned its head and it looked at the tower. 200 yards, shutters closed. No lantern, no light in that box at all. Me behind a wooden panel with my eye at a half-inch gap. It looked directly at the tower, and it held there. And then it did the thing I still see when I can't sleep. It raised one hand, slow, and it pressed the back of its wrist against its own mouth, hard, the way you'd stifle a cough in a theater, like it was holding something in. And its shoulders were moving, this small, rhythmic hitch, and there was no sound at all, and I realized the sound was what it was holding in, and that it was holding it in because of the tent. It stood like that, wrist to its mouth, shaking with the effort of being quiet for most of a minute. Then it dropped back down onto all fours in a single motion that no man could make, and it was gone north up the drainage, and the crashes faded out, and the bugs came back. The tent never moved. The guy slept through the entire thing. In the morning he broke camp and hiked out the way he'd come, waving at the tower again from the switchback, and I stood on the catwalk and waved back with a face like nothing, and then I went inside and threw up in the sink. The notebook entry for that night is longer than all my others put together, and the last line of it is, "It didn't skip the tent because of me. It skipped the tent because the moon wasn't finished with it yet, or because of some rule I don't know. There are rules I don't know." 2 nights later, the moon at full, a bow hunter went missing 11 miles southeast, in the next drainage over, off Cabin Ridge's side of the district, not my drainage. He was scouting elk before the season, camped alone, and when he didn't come home his brother called it in, and for 6 days the district was full of helicopters and dog teams and guys in orange, and Walt and I worked the radios for the search, relaying coordinates, glassing our sectors. They found his camp intact. Food hung properly, sleeping bag laid out, boots gone, and his bow still in its case, which the search coordinator kept coming back to on the radio because nobody could make it make sense. A bow hunter walking away from camp at night without his bow. They never found him. It went into the papers as a probable bear encounter, and the district put up new signage at the trailheads. And one night, deep in the search, Walt keyed up on our quiet channel and said, "What was your moon on the night he went missing?" Not a question, flat. And I said, "Full." And he said, "Yeah." And neither of us said anything else. And that "yeah" is the closest thing to a confession about all of this I've ever gotten from another adult human being. After the search wrapped up, the whole district went quiet. And I mean everything. 2 weeks, no walkers, no runners, moon waning down through half and gone, drainages full of ordinary noise, ridges empty. Like the entire mountain range had been sent to its room. I actually relaxed. I finished 3 more books. I logged 2 smokes, both little lightning strikes that rained out on their own. September came in cold and gorgeous, the larches starting to think about turning, and I let myself believe the strange part of the summer was over, because I was 26, and I still thought things ended when they got quiet. The September full moon came on the 17th. The day before it was a walker day, which by itself broke no rules. But it was the strangest walker day of the summer. I counted 5 of them. 5, when I'd never seen more than 2, and they weren't ambling. They were moving with purpose along the crests, all of them trending south to north, and one of them, on Boot Ridge, was carrying something. A length of deadfall, a whole small tree, 10 or 12 feet of it, carried over one shoulder the way a man carries a ladder. It took it north along the crest and down over the far side, out of my sight, and about 20 minutes later another one came along the same crest carrying another one. They were moving wood. In the middle of the afternoon, in plain view of a federal fire lookout, things that did not exist were relocating timber, and all I could think to do about it was write it down in a composition notebook, a dead man left in a cabinet. I didn't sleep much that night, but the night was quiet. Runners don't come the night before the full moon got to its peak, or they hadn't all summer. The 17th dawned windless and sharp, frost on the catwalk railing, and it stayed dead clear all day, and I did not see a single living thing bigger than a raven. No deer. No elk down by the lake, where there were always elk in the evening. The whole visible world was holding still. At 6:50 the sun went down. At 7:40 the moon came up over the eastern ridges, enormous and orange, and I stood on the catwalk and watched it come, and from the north drainage, in the last gray light, before full dark, a runner called. Before dark. That was the first rule to break, and I felt it break, physically. A drop in my stomach like a step that isn't there. All summer the runners had kept to the deep hours, midnight to 4, and here was that wrong-throated, almost howl rolling up out of the valley while there was still color in the sky. And it was answered, immediately, from the west drainage, and then from the south, and I stood on that catwalk doing the math with my skin going cold, because all summer I had never heard runners in more than one drainage at a time, and I was hearing them in 3. Then, on the crest of Dog's Back, black against the last of the light, walkers came up out of the timber and stood on the ridgeline. At night. Walkers, at night, and not walking. They came up onto the crest and they stopped, spread out along it, and I counted 7 before it got too dark to count. 7 tall shapes standing on the ridge above the north drainage, facing down into it, facing the sounds. Standing the way people stand along a fence line when something's coming up the road. I went inside. I closed all 4 shutters and dogged them down. I killed the pilot light on the stove. I took the radio and the water jug and put them next to the bed. And then I stood in the middle of that dark glass box with the moonlight coming through the shutter gaps in thin white lines. And I listened to the north drainage fill up with the sound of running, more of them than I had ever heard, coming down the valley like the valley was a drain and someone had pulled the plug. And I got the padlock out of the drawer. 55 steps up. A trap door, a hasp, a $4 lock. I knelt on the floor and hung it and clicked it shut, and the click was very loud in the room, and I put the key on the chain around my neck, and I sat down on the floor next to the trap door with my back against the bed frame, and that is where I spent the night. The sounds didn't happen in order. They came from all over the compass at once, and they went on for hours. Running, constant, below me on the flanks of my own knob, which had never happened. My tower sits on a bald summit, and the runners had kept to the valley floors all summer like it was law, and now they were on the slopes directly under me, circling the base of the mountain, and their calls had lost the held-in quality from the lake. They were not muffling anything anymore. Impacts. From up on Dog's back and then from closer, from the saddle just east of my knob, heavy meat and bone impacts that I felt through the tower legs, through the floor, up into my back where it touched the bed frame. The steel would ring, very faintly, a hum more than a sound, the way it rings in a windstorm, except the air was dead still. Trees, not falling like a sawyer drops them, one clean crack and a rush. Breaking sideways, green wood, a wet tearing sound, and once a whole series of them, 4 or 5 in a line, pop, 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 like something very large going through a fence. And screaming. I've gone back and forth for years about whether to call it screaming, because it wasn't human. None of it was human. But there is a register of sound that means pain in any throat that has one, and there was a lot of it that night. From the runners, always from the runners, high and furious and cut off short. The walkers made a sound too, and it was almost worse for being so plain. A low, flat, chesty boom, no anger in it that I could hear, no pitch to it at all. It sounded like a foghorn. It sounded like enforcement. Around 1 in the morning, something ran up my mountain. I heard it start at the bottom, in the brush at the base of the knob, and I heard it come, that bounding rhythm I knew, except aimed uphill at the tower. And there is nothing between the tree line and the tower legs but 40 yards of bare rock and scrub, and it crossed that in a time I have never been willing to write down. It hit the tower. It hit one of the legs, or the stairs, low down, and the whole structure swayed, actually swayed. The pencil cup on the table went over and rolled, and I heard the thing scrabbling at the steel, claws or nails on the cross braces, coming up not by the stairs but through the frame itself, and I was pressed against the bed frame with the key in my fist so hard it left a mark I had for a week, and I heard it reach maybe halfway up. And then the foghorn sound, right below the tower, close and enormous, one single flat blast that I felt in my teeth, and everything on the steel stopped. What came next took a long time, and it was almost gentle, and it was the worst part of the night. The thing on the frame came down, not falling, climbing down, slow, and I could hear under it a second thing breathing, a huge, slow bellows of a thing, and there was a scuffle at the base, short, and a runner's scream that started full and got carried away from me, literally carried, moving off down slope while it screamed, fading around the shoulder of the knob, and then stopping mid-note. After that, the sounds of the night moved north, and got farther, and by 3 or so it was down to the far end of the drainage, and by 4 it was single calls, spread way out, one answering another at long intervals like the last people leaving a party. That's when I heard the stairs, one tread at a time. Not climbing, that's the thing, not coming up. The bottom 4 or 5 steps only, and slow, and heavy enough that each one came through the frame into the floor under me. Creak, creak. And then a sound I couldn't place at first, a long sliding compression of the steel, the whole tower settling half an inch and holding, the way a truck settles when someone big gets in. It sat down. At the base of my stairs, on the bottom steps, Something with the mass of livestock sat down and leaned its back against the frame of the tower, and I felt its weight in the floor for the rest of the night. And I could hear it breathing, that same slow bellows, and every so often the breath would catch, and huff, and the frame would move a hair, and I finally worked out what direction the sounds were oriented, and I understood that it was not facing the stairs, and it was not facing the tower. It was facing out, facing the tree line, facing north, where the last of the calls were still coming from, and every time one of those calls floated up the drainage, the breathing under me would go still until the call died, and then start again. I sat on the floor of that box with my back against the bed and the key in my fist, and 55 steps below me, the biggest living thing I have ever shared a night with, sat with its back against my tower and watched the woods until the sky went gray. I know when it left because the tower rose. That's the only way to say it. Right at first light, the steel unloaded. That half-inch came back. The bottom tread spoke one more time. And by the time I got the nerve to open the east shutter, the rock around the tower base was empty, and the frost was coming up silver everywhere except one long, pressed black shape against the bottom of the stairs, angled out toward the trees. I went down around 8. The bottom step's handrail post, a 4x4, was cracked through, pushed out of plumb, the way a fence post looks after a bull has been leaning on it all summer. 40 yards downslope, at the tree line, there was a drag mark going into the timber, and I did not follow it. On the second step from the bottom, sitting in the exact center of the tread, was my padlock's twin, not mine. Mine was still on the hasp above my head. This one was the same brand, rusted to brown lace, decades old, and its shackle had been pulled open. Not cut, pulled, the loop drawn out into a straight, soft curve, like taffy. Somebody had locked that trapdoor before me. Somebody's $4 hadn't been the part that mattered. I set it back down where it was. It felt like it had been put there, and things that are put somewhere are messages, and the message as I read it was, "We know about the lock, and the lock is fine, and the lock is not what kept you." I finished the season. That surprises people. It never surprised Walt. October came, I hauled my gear down, I left the black notebook in the cabinet behind the coffee can where it had waited for me, and before I put the rubber band back on, a new rubber band, I finished DK's list. Under his broken-off Rule 4, I wrote, 4. They don't share. You will never see both in the same 24 hours. If that ever changes, the drainages are being cleaned out, and it is not about you. 5. On that night, lock the hatch anyway and sit quiet, and listen for the stairs. When the big one sits down at the bottom, you can sleep if you're able. Nothing crosses that ground twice. I did 2 more summers on Purcell Point. The rule never broke again. Every September full moon I slept by the hatch with the key around my neck. Twice I woke before dawn to the tower settling, the bottom treads creaking, and that slow bellows breathing below me, facing the trees, checking, like passing your old house. I don't work lookouts anymore. I live in a city now, and mostly it's fine. But some nights the moon rises over the buildings, the traffic goes quiet, and my legs tense before my brain knows why. Old wiring. I think about a man in a glass box a mile up in the dark, and everything that circled him all summer, while he believed he was the one keeping watch.